Good morning, church. Alexander Maclaren was one of Great Britain's most famous preachers of the 19th century. He was also called the Prince of Expository Preachers, and he gave a sermon once on Jesus healing the blind man, which is found in Mark chapter 8, and it was titled The Gradual Healing of the Blind. So today's devotional is a tribute to this beautiful message that he gave, and it's a summary of the original sermon. And we'll begin with Mark chapter 8, verses 22 to 25. We'll read these verses. And they came to Bethsaida, and they brought a blind man to Jesus and implored him to touch him. Taking the blind man by the hand, he brought him out of the village. And after spitting on his eyes and laying his hands on him, he asked him, "Do you see anything?" And he looked up and said, "I see men, for I see them like trees walking around." Then again he laid his hands on his eyes, and he looked intently and was restored, and began to see everything clearly. So, this healing of the blind man, and one of the other miracle we see in Mark 7 is the healing of deaf and dumb person. There is something common in this, that the sufferers were taken away from people and Jesus healed them in private. And this particular miracle on healing this blind man has something very unique which no other miracle has, and that is the miracle was performed in stages. So the healing happened gradually, and this is something very unique. And in fact, it's like a physician trying to experiment with the patient, giving him certain medicine and then asking the patient, "Are you feeling better?" And then experimenting with the medicine until the patient is recovered fully. And we will see there are three peculiar things in this miracle which is not seen in any other miracle. One is that Jesus isolating the man, and the second one is Christ using outward means. The third one is Christ making his power work slowly. And we'll see one by one these three things. First is Christ isolating the man that he would heal. Who was this man? Not much is known about him, but if we read the history in those days, he must have been a Gentile. But interestingly, this man did not come on his own. He was brought by his friends, maybe villagers or some relatives, and he didn't even ask to be healed. The prayer was from these people, and they begged Jesus to touch him and heal him. So, how would Jesus connect with a man who does not want to be healed, or at least that's not very clear? And then he can't even see the compassionate eyes of Jesus. How would Jesus connect with him? And it's very simple. Jesus gave a very simple, gentle touch to this man. And then he touched this man, and so that the man would feel that this Jew is showing interest in me. He may or may not be able to heal me, but at least he's going to try something, and that is good. And this is also a good example where when we connect with people, do they see the compassion and genuine care for them? That's how we can connect. And it's a good example that Jesus has given us. And then Jesus led the blind man out of the village into solitude. And the farther he was taken away from his friends, the more he was now going to depend on Jesus, because now there will be more expectations, and then he's surrendering himself to Jesus for guidance. Now he cannot see, and Jesus is leading him out of the village. Isn't this how Christ deals with us? Isn't it like maybe sometimes it's sorrow, sometimes sickness, or by shutting all the activities in our life which we really like to do, or maybe leading us away from people on whom we depend a lot. These are the ways where we are suddenly taken away, and then we realize that we have Christ with us, and that's it, and we are uh, having his sufficient companionship. And Jesus is a lover of single souls. He liked to work on souls who are by themselves, and then they realize that they have Jesus with them. The second thing we see is that Christ has used sense bound nature by using outward means. What it means is, let's take an example. The incarnation of Christ was a great example of God stooping down from heaven to earth, and God became man. So that was God's way of telling that let's not talk about God, let people see him, let people talk to him. And that is how God used these ways so that we can understand God better. We have limited capacity. And Jesus was the greatest teacher. He used fishermen boats, fishing nets, seeds, sowing of these seeds, harvest, and homemade articles, bread, to explain the profound truths. And that is how God here is using his touch and saliva. It doesn't mean that that saliva or the touch has the power, but the healing is in Jesus, not in the means that he used. And that's a good reminder for us. The third thing is Christ is accommodating the pace of his power to the slowness of the man's faith. So when Christ asked the blind man if he can see, he replied, I see men as tree walking. It was like a dim glimmer of hope had come into his eye, but his eyes are not yet educated, trained well to focus intently and to distinctly see figures. And that's why he's not able to see things clearly. And when Jesus put his hand again and asked the man to look up, look intently, that is what it means, like you're training this new faculty and using it to test its limit and gain perfection. And then we see that he was restored and he saw all things clearly. So he was healed slowly because he believed slowly. People only wanted an outward miracle, but Jesus was more interested in the faith of this man, in this inward spiritual growth of this man. And it is like, according to your faith, it will be given to you. Then Jesus was working on this principle like a mother who is intentionally walking slowly because the toddler steps are little steps, and you need to adjust your pace. So in general, we learn that these miracles was not just a way of showing that Christ is divine, but it was an outcome of Christ's compassionate heart being brought in touch with the human need. And that is what this miracle was all about. And we see that the Christian progress is not in seeing new things or learning new things all the time. After all, it's the same Christ, it's the same cross. But when we grow in the knowledge of Christ, that is when we see Christ in a fresh way, and that is when we have more desire and more capacity to know Jesus. Our faith grows, and then we have more desire to serve him. Amen.